Welcome to the TWIJ Show. I am Chris Wink, your host and the CEO of Technically, a new site about local economies in change. Each week, the TWIJ Show dives into issues of building better companies with leaders who are doing just that. We are an extension of Technically's This Week in Jobs newsletter, which you can join at technically.com/subscribe. Today, what companies get wrong about diversity? Recently, centuries-old sins of American history were brought to the fore once again. Workplaces across the country have gone back to their own involvement and responsibility. Many have formed task forces or returned to their existing resource groups. So we're going to ask today, all right, you got the diversity committee, now what? To have that conversation, I am joined by Whitney A. Whitney runs an innovation firm, Afara Global. She advises early stage startups, Fortune 100 corporations, and everything in between. While many of her engagements are on the product side of the business, she's also led many engagements in human capital, including organizational assessments, diversity and inclusion strategy and implementation, and employee engagement, product development, and implementation. I also got Angie Jane Marie. What up, Angie? Angie's strategic partnerships and advocacy leads strategic partnerships and advocacy campaigns that advance safety, fairness, and dignity for women at work. Angie has spearheaded advocacy initiatives. She began her career in the U.S. House of Representatives, an incredibly deliberative body, as a legislative assistant for Congresswoman Donna F. Edwards of Maryland, where she helped launch an economic agenda for women. Hey, Angie, Whitney, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Chris. This is exciting.
This is probably the most important moment of your life. That's what I think. And so, fortunately, hey, I got a company. I formed the diversity committee, so I'm done, right? Like, I've solved this. I'm good. Is that? You guys just sign off on that?
Absolutely not.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to engage with this important issue. Is that what you're telling me?
You have to engage. You've got to get uncomfortable. You've got to resource that diversity committee. I think so often organizations feel like, okay, well, we've got an employee resource group that's focused on diversity that is created for people of color within the organization. So often, though, those recommendations are not, brought up to the top. The organizations don't resource those committees. I mean, they need, professional development resources. They need resources to bring in trainers to lead conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And frankly, what we find, I think, across organizations is that the diversity committee is one of many things an organization should be doing. And certainly this conversation has to start at the top of the organization. And so the leaders within the organization have to truly believe in attaching, metrics around how diverse, how equitable, how inclusive their organization is, just as they would attach, metrics related to any sort of performance indicators. And so, the diversity committee is a very important first step, but there's a lot more that can and should be done.
Yeah, and Angie makes some really great points around resourcing that type of work and prioritizing it the way that an organization would with any top priority. So some of the things that I see that make me cringe and think, oh my gosh, this organization really means well, but what's happening is when an organization says, okay, we've got to do something. We have to look at issues of equity and diversity. Let's put together this committee, and everybody on this committee is going to volunteer their time and do this on top of their day jobs. Holy smokes, that is problematic. Mm-hmm. What I have been seeing, and I hear this from clients, I'm hearing this from family, friends, my network, I'm seeing this everywhere, where you have particularly Black Americans who are within organizations where their companies, their nonprofits are saying, okay, we have to get serious about this. Let me tap this Black person to lead this work, and they're not getting paid anything extra to do that work. They still have all of their regular responsibilities, and they're being asked to basically educate their non-Black coworkers on these issues, regardless of whether or not that person has any background at all in diversity, equity, or inclusion. So there are a few things that are really problematic about that. One, you're asking this person to do this with no compensation. Hello, we talked about the sins of this nation. You are asking Black people within your organization to do unpaid work, literally. And that is in order to advance equity within your organization. It's mind-boggling, but so many companies are doing it. So many nonprofits, so many well-meaning organizations, that's what they're doing. So that is highly, highly problematic. Secondly, when you're layering this on top of someone's day-to-day job, what organizations, what management are not realizing is that you're now making it harder for that person to advance in their career and get promoted because they have KPIs. They have metrics that they're trying to hit. And now you're saying on top of your day-to-day work, also do this other thing that generally does not fit in at all with what you're being measured on to get promoted in your role. Thirdly, you're actually advancing stereotypes and misconceptions around the fact that, oh, let's just go ask a random Black person. They'll know what to do. No, there are people who are experts in this field, people who actually have spent their entire careers, or people who have gotten tons of experience, they've done research. There are experts in this field who do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Tap experts. Don't just say, oh, let's send the random Black person to go and educate everybody on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, with that said, I understand that organizations often feel like, well, we don't know where to start or what to do. So I'm so glad, Chris, that we are having this discussion so that we can help provide resources in terms of what folks can do.
We're going to dive into some specifics, but when you're saying there, Whitney, it reminded me of a framing device. Someone once put it to me that in like the diversity committee, leaders misinterpret what they're doing. They'll see it as like, as you're alluding to, essentially an unpaid marketing department. Hey, this specific issue, they'll do it. They got the marketing thing done. No one else to think about it. Or instead, this is a broad-based competitiveness issue. Would you say there's the competitiveness department and they're the competitiveness committee and they're dealing with whether we're competitive as an organization? No, as a leader, you naturally understand that is every department across issues, across it knows no bounds. And you might want people to be charged with competitiveness and be resourced to do so. And that framing device for me was always helpful, that like, if you're thinking it as, I'm going to have an unpaid committee to deal with this core issue, that's something very different than this is central across teams and departments. That's like how I've tried to understand it, that it's you can have folks who might want to call out specific issues inside of your competitiveness, or in this case, racial equity, but it's not like they'll deal with it.
Yeah, and I think this framing around competition, I think, is important, because what we know is that organizations that invest in doing this work right, they are more competitive. They're competitive in the fact that they build a diverse and inclusive workplace. They're competitive in that they retain the best talent. You have Black people and people of color within the organization who feel comfortable, who feel committed, who feel dedicated to being there for the long haul. You avoid the high cost of turnover. We know that it's expensive to hire new people. And when you have workplaces that are toxic because they don't keep these things in mind, you're driving Black and brown and women, Black and brown people and women out of the workforce, which contributes to a whole slew of other diversity and equity and inclusion issues in our broader society. And then I think, you know, especially for organizations that are client facing, that sell products, your clients and your customers and your consumers, they want to see that you know, you're walking the walk and you're talking the talk. And so I think it actually is exactly something that is related to an organization's competitive advantage, to really prioritize and, again, invest in the same way that they would invest in research and development and product development, and, you know, bringing in, you know, new resources to help them do the work better. This is one area where it really does require that sustained and focused investment in order to stay competitive over the long haul.
So then let's do it. All right. Maybe the company already had a diversity committee. Maybe it fell somewhat fallow, or maybe it had done important work, but it's looking for that next step. Or perhaps someone said, crap, we got to do something here, and we set it up for the first time. What are some of those gut checks about what we think mean being resourced or not being shoved to the side, but being somewhat central? Are there starting points or warning signs or just first steps you would want to call out?
Yeah, and Angie touched on this some, in the sense that there's the question, and I love how you're framing this as a gut check, right? So there's the question of how involved is your leadership, right? If this is really important to the organization, and we're not just trying to, do something for cosmetic reasons, but we get the competitiveness, we get the importance for our workforce, we get the importance for consumers in terms of how we're going to be able to show up in our products and our services. If this is real, how involved is your leadership? And leadership starts at the top. What are the folks who are literally in the C-suite saying in your organization, and what are they doing? And what do they look like? Who's in your C-suite, right? So really starting with that gut check at the very top in terms of your leadership. And if you look at your leadership and you say, actually, we've got a long way to go in terms of informing, educating, in terms of even advancement and promotion to folks in leadership, it's thinking about this strategically. So not just we're putting this Band-Aid on it, but how would you assess any type of strategic project that was important for your organization, right? You would take an overarching look across your organization. And that's exactly where I think so many orgs would benefit from starting. So looking at your people. So looking at your recruiting processes, your onboarding, your retention, your advancement, looking at the full pipeline of folks from someone who's never heard of your company to someone who is promoted into senior leadership, and looking at how that can be as equitable as possible. Again, to Angie's point, don't just have some random person do this, right? There are experts. There are experts out there who can help you with that kind of work. So looking at your people, and then also looking at your vendors, your suppliers, right? How are people getting contracts to do business with you, right? Are you working with those women-owned, those minority-owned businesses? Or is it kind of the same people are getting the contracts over and over again, and they are only from majority backgrounds? So looking at your suppliers, your vendors, and thirdly, looking at your products and services. This is incredible. I have a client of mine who shared that at their company, they have a committee, right? So they have a committee, they've been having discussions, and at that company—
I'm getting the sense this isn't going to go well.
It's not.
Discussions.
Yeah, they're having discussions. There are some problematic things about those discussions, but we'll put that off to the side for now. We'll table that. But one of the questions that someone in senior leadership, so great that the person is in the discussion, senior leadership, and that they're asking questions, that is helpful, right? But they asked a question around what else can we be doing? And my client voiced that there was a need to look at some of the actual companies that they work with, some of the clients that they serve who frankly are advancing inequality, who are contributing to systemic injustices in this country. And the senior leader at this organization said, well, that's kind of pie in the sky. Like, we can't do that kind of thing, right? So when the rubber meets the road around the actual revenue that's coming into the company and where it's coming from, what you're seeing is that there's not necessarily this commitment for some folks, right? There's not necessarily that commitment to say, wow, like, we're supporting this company that is really clear in terms of how they make their money and the fact that they are making their money off of injustices that exist, right? So looking at those three areas, your people, looking at those vendors and suppliers, and looking at your actual products and services, right? We've seen brands come out on that product and service piece and say, oh my goodness, Aunt Jemima, we got to take that off the shelf, right? Whew, it took us a while to get there. We did finally get there. But, it makes me wonder, how long were there people within those organizations that were saying that? And then folks were doing like what this organizational leader I just mentioned did and said, oh, well, we can't do that now. We can't go that far, right? So looking at those three areas and really viewing it as a strategic priority.
I just want to emphasize this point that Whitney just made. It's really critical to think top down and across the organization about how you're being anti-racist. starting with the people is super critical, but this moment is about so much more than just diversity and equity and inclusion within the workplace. Let's not forget that where this conversation was around the murder of a Black man at the hands of police, right? We're having a structural conversation. And so it's really important that it's not just about looking at, okay, let's check this box, let's do the ad, let's, shout out our our ERG. It's really about, we're in a transformative moment to make sure that our people feel valued, that our organization is showing up in the right way in the world. And that means, again, like Whitney said, what are the products that you're producing? How do they impact Black and Brown communities? I mean, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, I used this platform where you can provide feedback on ads, and it's largely populated by folks of color. And one company was doing this really beautiful ad, around Black Lives Matter, and I'm like, but your product really harms Black people. So what are you doing about that? So, I mean, and I think that beyond the products, it's about figuring out how those organizations are using their power. They are powerful. They can influence lawmakers. They can influence elected officials to support broader policies that help impact Black communities. So I think that, we are in this moment where it is great that people are showing up, that they're asking these questions, that they're setting up the diversity committees, that this is now on the agenda. But there's a lot more to do, and that's actually not enough. So you have to remember, like, this is a moment to be doing more and going even beyond and getting to that point of even being uncomfortable, because that's how progress is going to happen.
A couple things I want to pull out there, Angie. One, I wrote down money, because it's critical to know that this is like one of those issues that you can't buy your way out. If anything, that can like be a trap, that like anyone can get a really good videography team. If you got enough money, you can make a really nice looking 30-second spot. And so when I think about organizations that might view this, you could have everyone from, hey, I'm very low margin, I'm just like this small firm, I can't possibly do anything big, all the way to like, I have so much money, I can do everything. And I think it's probably important to hit on that this is a different axis, that this is not quite about, sure, if you got a lot of money, that's part of the responsibility and privilege you have, but not having money ain't an excuse to not do anything, and having a lot of money isn't an excuse to saying like, I can kind of just like buy my way out of it. This is a different kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Angie.
I mean, I think when I think about investing obviously comes with some dollar amounts at times. But I think organizations should look at how they actually invest in doing work across the organization. I think it's not necessarily a time where you can just be throwing money at the problem. But again, like Whitney mentioned early on, people being asked to do above and beyond what their work is, like there's money attached to that. Knowing that you have problems with racism within your organization, you've got to invest in someone who can figure out how to root those problems out. Also, you can invest time. Are leaders reading about anti-racism? Are they educating themselves in their on and their off time? So there are a lot of ways to think about investing. I think a lot of them do require financial backing because it is all work. And I think we live in a society that understands work and value in terms of dollars. But I think there are other ways that you can be investing in terms of what are you doing to educate yourself? What are you doing to push yourself beyond your comfort limits? That all organizations should be doing, regardless of size and regardless of, profit margins.
Mm-hmm. And the investment piece is really important to think of as an investment. No one would say, oh, we're going to do a new product launch or we're going to have this new marketing campaign. We don't expect it to cost any money. Like, who would come up with that? Who would even think that, right? Nobody's thinking that. And when it comes to investment, right, it's going to scale to some extent based on the size of your company. But it's important for companies to understand that increasingly consumers and also increasingly even your B2B spaces, so not just B2C, are thinking about this more and are looking at companies to say, do they align with my values? Do they align with my values? Are they walking the talk? And this is a competitive advantage if you are showing up in that way, compared to, frankly, if you're not, you need to be wondering, hey, if I'm putting out these ads or I'm putting out these statements, if I'm pretending that my company's doing the kinds of things that we're actually not doing and that we're not prioritizing and that we're not taking seriously, when is this going to blow up online?
Yes.
Right? When are people going to hear about it? When is someone who works here going to put a post up online that's going to expose what's actually happening within this culture? When are our consumers going to boycott our product? When are other companies, if you're in the B2B space, going to feel like, oh, they had that bad press, we can't work with them, right? So, you would rather folks be able to see it as a strategic priority and be able to be proactive before they have to pay for the crisis managers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the crisis management is perhaps too late at that point. A couple of technical points that I think are underlying here that I want to pull out. One, Whitney, you said something along the lines of like, the university committee sure shouldn't be like, hey, I found 3 Black employees and I put them on a committee. So I think it's super important. Something that resonated with me a ton is that, like, questions of diversity, actually, it's a white people problem. So if you're fortunate enough to have the kinds of relationships in an organization where you can get support from people of color, black leaders and otherwise, great. Like, if someone feels that they're invested in this organization, what a gift and a privilege. And as you alluded to, like, you can create some roles, you can do small paid committee, a small amount of time, small amount of money, more time, more money, but you can say we want to join a committee and want to do a stipend or whatever, depending on your time commitment. But that is probably crucial to think that it should look a little bit like your organization. So if your organization is super white, probably should have some white people on that committee too. Can we talk a little bit about that, of like,
yeah,
who should this look like?
Yeah, you make such a great point, right? There is this dynamic of this age-old dynamic, frankly, of Black people being in these positions to educate white people about racism, which is so problematic, because you make the wonderful point that this really is a white people issue. So what is awesome, and I actually have seen this in some organizations. So on a positive side, I have seen some organizations say, okay, we're going to have a white person lead this work, and obviously in consultation with folks from these different communities within the company, right? So within consultation with our ERG folks, with Black leaders within the company. But we're going to have white folks educate themselves. We're going to have white folks bring experts in. And one of the things that's most striking to me is that I have had clients who are leaders within organizations, and whether you are doing this in the way that we talked about with that other example where, you got a Black leader speaking up and being told, okay, we can't do that kind of thing. Or in the sense that I've seen on the positive side with a client where you've got white folks who are very engaged, who are, my client has described how it's been so encouraging. People are doing reading on their own. They're watching documentaries on their own. They are coming to the table informed like they would with the strategic priority. And their CEO is showing up and engaged and driving forward and saying, hey, can we have someone come in and speak on this? Can we have an expert on this and that? Like, this is night and day. And what I'm saying, and what Angie is saying, is this is important for your organization strategically long-term, because it sends a signal to your talent. It sends a signal to your talent who might otherwise say, well, I want to go to the company where the Black people are being treated better than they are here. Right? It sends a signal to your consumers when your CEO is able to talk intelligently about these issues and be able to be seen as a leader, right? It sends a certain kind of signal that can set you apart. But you are absolutely right, Chris. This cannot be where, oh, we just have the Black people that are going to lead this and come in and do presentations for everybody else. And fortunately, I have seen some organizations do this well. And there are a whole lot of other ones, though, most of them that are not.
Mm. Yeah. Just to even pick up on that point, so much of what you said, Whitney, is really critical. I think that piece around making sure that it's not just the Black staff and that, in fact, white employees are helping to lead the work is important. That piece around in consultation with and with the buy-in of the Black and people of color, Black staff and people of color within your organization is important, because I think some organizations have had sort of folks volunteer to do the work, but have been problematic in the organization for a minute, which erodes trust in that part of the process. And so again, just like making sure that you're doing this work in careful consultation with the Black and people of color staff that you have is very important. The other thing I think that's critical about that is in recognizing that this is everybody's job. It is everyone's job within the organization to call out racism, to call out racist work practices, to call out problematic statements. It's not just the work of the people of color within the organization to do that. And in fact, so often when that does happen and when people of color are the only ones who speak up, they're retaliated against, right? Which creates a culture where you don't feel comfortable. So it needs to be the responsibility of everyone within the organization to feel encouraged and empowered to speak out, and also to have really clear policies about what happens when something goes wrong. We're not all perfect. We will all mess up. People are prone to make mistakes. We should all admit and agree to that. But to outline a process within the organization, to have a zero tolerance policy for inappropriate behavior is really key. And then to set up those systems. All right, what happens when something goes wrong? What does accountability look like for this organization? And to bring the team together to really help to define and dictate what that means. The other thing that I think is also important about this is, again, as organizations are looking to how they work with and consult with their Black staff and other people of color staff within the organization, to be clear that they're not only asking Black staff to weigh in on issues of race, because that's a problem. They are there to do a job. And they were hired because they are skilled at all sorts of things that are, the role and responsibility in which they've been hired. They can't just be seen as, okay, now you're the expert on cultural sensitivity. No. I think it's really important that people are given opportunities to use all of their skill sets in this moment to show up, to be that strategic thinker within the organization, to have the opportunity to set, to set new goals for profit, to set a new direction for product development. I mean, again, just like not to think about, Black staff in this one sort of single note way, because I think that ends up being a problem as well. We don't want to just be asked what to do in these moments of crisis. We want to be valued every single day across all of the organization's work streams. And so I think this is something else to keep in mind as organizations are thinking about what this work looks like. It's really hard. There's a lot going on in here. And I think, sort of that humility also is really required to know that everyone's starting from a particular place, but that we are here with the intention of creating an anti-racist workplace. We're all working along that same path and recognize that, that there are going to be stumbles along the way, but there's a shared commitment across the organization to focus on the issue.
Well said. We're kind of on time. I want to hit on a couple last tactics and then send us out. Our framing here was got the diversity committee now what, paying people for their time if it's a long-standing initiative. Make sure there's some leadership there. Make sure there's some damn white people there. Treat it like a strategy as much as you would any strategy. It runs across departments. This is a committee that can help inform how it's being deployed elsewhere. It's not, a place to outsource behaviors. When we engage experts, have any best practices or thoughts about what's the right email to Whitney? Hey, Whitney, I want to engage you. What is insane and what is like the right time or right?
Oh, wow. I love this question.
Good.
Because it is something I have seen, especially, in recent times. In terms of the right email to me, or to someone like me, it really is, hi, Whitney, I'm so-and-so with XYZ organization. We're trying to be thoughtful about being anti-racist, and we are familiar with your expertise, or we saw you on the TWIJ Show.
The TWIJ Show.
Right. And we have set aside budget for an external expert to come in and help our team. we would like to set up some time to chat with you about your services and if it could be a fit. So there are a few things there that are important, right? So one, the fact that you're reaching out in the first place is awesome. Whether or not someone is a fit to work with me, or I'm going to refer them to somebody else, or whatever the case, the fact that an organization is saying, we're going to get outside help is so important. For every human, we cannot see the back of our own heads, right? Like there's a reason that we need mirrors. There's a reason that we need other people. We need outside perspectives. And also, without that external voice, there can often be so much pressure on the internal team to get every single thing right. And there's a lot involved in terms of what we just talked about. I mean, this has just been a short conversation, and Angie and I are like saying all these specific things, right? Because we work in this space. And so that's a lot of pressure often for people within the organization. So first step, actually reaching out is a great thing. The second piece is being clear about what it is you actually are interested in, right? So to say, hey, we're having issues, help, where you kind of have not been proactive at all, and now you are in crisis mode. I have had organizations reach out in this situation. They have had very problematic things happen. They have not been proactive at all. They don't have any of those things that Angie mentioned in terms of systems, processes. They have none of those things. And they're reaching out really to me when they should be talking to a crisis manager, because you know what has already hit the fan. So the second part that's important in that email is saying, hey, we're trying to be intentional about being anti-racist. So putting it out there, hey, hopefully you're reaching out at the point where it hasn't hit the fan, you can be proactive. So reach out, do it early. The second piece, and really filters into this third one of, if you're being proactive, you have budget. You've set aside budget for this. You are not reaching out to me to pick my brain or get ideas from me.
Worst phrase in the English language, yeah.
Yeah, no. You are not reaching out for that. I have a whole coaching program called Take Back Your Time. I value my time. I respect other people's time.
Whitney, can we do a quick PSA for everyone watching, reading? Just like, doesn't matter what the topic is, never use the phrase pick your brain. I mean, maybe like a really close friend or someone. If you don't have like, if that person won't be at your wedding or something, you're not allowed to use the phrase pick your brain. That is a new rule. Sorry. Go ahead. I hate that phrase. Go ahead.
And if someone I love the PSA. And if someone obviously has a business where this is what they do, be prepared, have a clear sense within your organization that we've got a budget, we plan to invest in this, and we're having a substantive conversation. Even if it's not a fit to work with that particular person, know that you're being intentional in reaching out to them. So those three things: reach out, first of all, get help, do it early enough so that you can be proactive, and actually have a budget. Don't just try to get free ideas and free consulting from people.
We're coming up on time, so I want to roll us out. That's so helpful, Whitney. Angie, so all right, I got my diversity committee. I listened here. I'm hoping to have this all settled around Q1 and be done with that. Is that? Can I do that? Can I just plan to be done? Is that how this works?
I love your questions, Chris. We know the answer is no. What would be helpful in Q1 is to set some really clear milestones and some clear goals and metrics around what it looks like what are you trying to work towards in Q1? But you need a Q2, a Q3, a Q4, a year 1, a year 2, a year 3, a year in perpetuity goal around this. And I think so often organizations will set up things in moments of crises and forget down the line. That is harmful. It creates actual harm, because in what Whitney's talking about, it's, of course the organization and the leadership is going to have to be involved, but I would think that a good process also involves the staff. And so you're asking the staff to, be very honest, to be vulnerable, to be open. You're opening up a lot in that conversation, and to not show a continued commitment to addressing the problem will erode, again, like I mentioned earlier, trust within the organization. And so for Q1, set a really clear milestone, set some really clear goals, but you have to know that this work is continuous. And as we were saying earlier, it is strategic. So alongside when the folks in the C-suite are looking at their performance, looking at their profit, looking at what's coming up, these metrics around diversity, equity, and inclusion have to be on that, in that slide deck. They have to be in that Excel sheet. They have to be wherever folks are looking at to see how their organization is doing. These metrics need to be there so that we can ensure that over time they're being evaluated and considered in the way that they need to be.
I think it's so. I want almost organizations to see it as an optimistic note that you're never done, and that can almost. I hope that can almost reduce stress. That you will always be engaging with this, so you're building infrastructure and culture and priorities, just like you would, to bring us back to the start of this conversation, on competitiveness. I assume you always want to stay competitive, and there's lots of different legs of competitiveness. This will be something that will be with you forever, and that should, I think, almost de-stress. We're going to go here in a second, so I wonder, Angie, Whitney, any last takeaways or things that you'd want to make sure people hop off this and say, like, I got to take that with me? Tactics, thoughts, PSAs, anything you want to send people off with?
I have two things.
Yeah.
For one, so I work at the organization Time's Up, and we actually created a guide on diversity, equity, inclusion in moments of crisis. This actually was developed coming out of COVID-19 and thinking about how organizations were adjusting in response to the health and economic crisis. After George Floyd's murder, and as we were starting to have this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, we updated that guide to include a series of recommendations around anti-racism workplaces. And so you all should go check that out on our website. You can also text LEADERS to 30644 to download the guide. Super useful resource, and if anyone wants to dig into it more, they should feel free to reach out to someone at the organization, to me or someone else at the organization.
Links will be in the description and on the Technically recap article to click below.
Fantastic.
Right, keep going, Angie.
The other point I wanted to make is around that last thing we were just mentioning about it being continuous work. I think that we will continue to evolve as people, and we're making progress. And I think just recognize that the thing that folks might need today might not be the same thing that they need tomorrow, and that has to be okay. This is an evolution, and folks may begin to demand more of the organization, which again has to be okay. So we are all in a useful starting point, but also know that this is a process that will continue to evolve. And I think that should be exciting, and it should feel like growth for an organization as well.
Perfect. Whitney, send us out. What the hell do the people need to know?
Yeah, I would say the biggest things, and I'm going to give you two like Angie. One would be really view this through that lens that we used of competitiveness, thinking about it across your business and how you can really give yourself that competitive advantage and resource it that way. Resource it that way so that you are bringing in experts, you are compensating your people. This is a true competitive advantage. Approach it that way. So view it that way and resource it that way.
That's perfect. All right, we got to go. That has been this week's TWIJ Show, conversations on building better companies. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Whitney. As always, like and subscribe. We've got other beautiful stories and conversations like this. We'll have some links to some past episodes that relate and otherwise. We'll see you on Technically. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Whitney. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.